Hello everyone, it's been quite the journey and at long last, we are here. So many of you wrote to me that you want to see an analysis, a breakdown, a reaction of The End, specifically Wylder's version. I'm just a little bit under the weather, so if I sound a little bit different, that's why. But I'm not gonna let that stop me from reacting to this one. I am looking forward to it. This track is gonna go a little bit differently than usual because we're going to have two separate, distinct parts of this track to look into. So instead of 3 phases, we're gonna have 2, but the format has not changed. We're going to have an uninterrupted reaction, then we're going to have a breakdown, and some lore talk. Honestly, the hype is through the roof. So without further ado, let's begin! With the solo string instrument, but it's a bit... And it's Hailstore's motif. Something about the instrument, though. It has a different color to it. Just the evolving variations, kind of emerging. That's not a harp. Oh, and there's this... Oh, there's these vocal beneath it. Again, with that solo sound of the strings, is so intimate. There's like a sliver of hope in it. Like the strings are just slightly off tune. It's like it's trying to lift itself. It's trying to have like a sliver of hope. This feels like Hailstore's theme, the dance, but it's stretched to be so slow, so sparse. With that pitch-dropping bass. And that tremolo. With the vocals just peeking out. The highest note of the entire part. That was freaking gorgeous. I can see why you guys recommended this. It is beautiful and it is so reserved. Such a transparent composition. You can really focus on what each instrument is doing in a way that allows you to re-experience this track every time anew. It's so cool. Yeah, let's break it down from the top. I'm so excited. It's very interesting. We're starting off with the sound of like a large slab of stone being dragged, as if like a huge stone door is being opened. Or now that I'm thinking about it, possibly being closed shut. And I will elaborate on that probably when we talk about the lore. Just keep that in mind. That is the first thing that we're exposed to in this track, which I find fascinating. Then I think the cello is playing the lead melody, which is Hailstore's theme, just a small fragment of it. But you will notice something about the solo string instruments in this particular piece. They are off tune, just slightly, just sometimes. And not only are they off tune, they have a more metallic sound, a more teeny sound, which could be achieved in multiple ways. It could have been a different instrument, but you can get pretty close to that with sound effects on a regular cello, and by playing with the bow a lot closer to the very bottom of the cello, so you get a more gnarly sound out of it. I also have to bring up the volume for a second, because I think I'm hearing a crackling bonfire in the ambience. No, it's rain. I made the same I made the same mistake that I did with the opening theme. I thought it was fire crackling, but this time I turned the volume up so it was a little easier to spot. But yeah, between the phrases of the melody, we have the rain speaking. It is an ever-present element in the score, so I find it so cool that we get to kind of hear it having a conversation with the instruments. One element is staying stagnant, it is inevitable in a way, and another is trying to have a conversation with it, trying to engage with it, which I find to be very lore appropriate in a way. Yeah, I'm definitely throwing out a lot of promises for the lore part, but I think it's beautiful. Now, you can hear this is Hailstore's theme, but try to focus on the color of the cello. Something sounds very nasally about it. Honestly, I sound pretty nasally myself today, but it takes one to know one. So yeah, there's something a lot more fragile, a lot more unstable. Almost like the melody isn't being bowed on a string or the cello, it's being bowed on Hailstore's armor. We get kind of this focus on metal, like an imitation of a cello, something that tries to behave like a different instrument, something a little uncanny. And considering the fact that we have a silver tier being utilized in the story, I think it's very appropriate. Now it's very noticeable that there is this bed of sound under the cello. There is something lower, and it is not 100% distinct. It is pretty hard to tell what it is because it is kind of flooded with an echoing effect called reverb, which is providing a sound with space, essentially. More space to echo in. Now, the space being more dominant than the melody, for example, or the original sound of that bass instrument running below everything, that is very much intentional. When you're listening through headphones or through speakers, for the composers, the space in which the music is being played is theoretically a compositional choice. Try to think about it like that. In the past, you had to go to a concert hall that was acoustically treated to perfection so you can hear the music played in a proper space. But the best game composers know, when you're talking about headphones especially, since you're injecting the sound directly into the player's ears, you have full control over the space that the music is being played in. With headphones, you don't even have to count on the room of the player. You have 100% control. Part of what accentuates the tragic nature of this melodic line that the cello is playing is that it's trying to move upwards. It's trying to rise. But we get to see it with a comparison. But we get to hear it with a comparison of something that is constant. In composition, we call that a pedal tone, a long note that usually lingers below the rest of the music and kind of makes all of it seem more dynamic in comparison, although it is dragging it down in kind. There's something so desperate about how this melody is trying to rise, but the farther it's rising, the weaker it becomes. It becomes more frail, it becomes more unstable, and the pressure of the bow is lessening, which is a choice that the player is doing here, and a very smart one at that. Because if you want to make something feel more hesitant or weaker or more desperate, you have two ways to go about it. You can apply more pressure because of the desperation, and you can apply less pressure to show that you're reaching out for something, but you're not quite able to touch it. There is something very emotional about the way that the melody is interpreted here. And this is one of the things that I always tell my students: this will never happen in a notation software. Music only happens when it's being performed. And every micro element of performance is a huge influence on how the final piece is going to be perceived. Two different performances of the same piece are probably going to sound a little bit different, and not because of human error, but because of human interpretation. The fact that they're easing the pressure of the bow allows them to have a more hollow sound, something that is, let's say, less full, less determined, and that has an emotional impact for sure. Up until now, when I listen to pluck string instruments, both in Elden Ring and Elden Ring Nightreign, I always felt like I was listening to a harp. This does not seem to be the case with this. Now, they may have changed it in other spots too, but these strings have a much pluckier sound. It sounds like they're wound up a lot tighter, something more akin to a guitar, or perhaps in certain situations a koto, a Japanese string instrument. But it's something that creates this tense air of uncertainty. It's definitely being played like a guitar with the way that, it's being plucked at. But I don't know. And the fact it comes back here, I do think it holds meaning, because we have seen it in Hailstorm's theme before, in the main theme for Nightreign. It's interesting that they would decide to come back to that sound now, in a way that is so transparent. The main reason why I'm considering it might be a koto and not a guitar, a classical guitar for that matter, isn't because of the sound of effects that are added to it. It's because the level of plucking, the intensity of plucking, it has a relatively limited dynamic range. That essentially means that the distance between the loudest note and the quietest note isn't very big. There's something very rigid about the dynamics of this instrument. They're still having dynamic movement within it, don't get me wrong, but it feels a lot more tense. It feels like it's wound up tighter than a classical guitar would be. That's why it reminds me more of a Japanese koto. And now, that little bedrock of sound, what we call the pedal tone, right? Now, that sound has vocals added onto it. It begins to take shape. Something is shaping up from being non distinct into a more intentional form. And we can hear the male tenor vocalists singing the vowel O, and we can hear it rising from that bedrock, which I find so interesting. Something taking shape out of being a blob really connects a lot to the silver tier once again. So it's very, very interesting. This little segment is fascinating. It has a very expressive treatment of time, of tempo, we don't really have rhythm, something that has been super influential in the entire track. I mean, the entire soundtrack. Usually we have a pretty defined rhythm we can follow. Here, it's a bit more loose. The plucking of the string instruments is a lot more free form when it comes to the time that it adheres to. We call that rubato, something that is free with how it's interpreting time. Now, if one of the instruments would do something that is very rhythm oriented, this would be impossible to do because to make something like this happen, we need to create space for it, and we need to create some level of consistency in the background so it can be more expressive. This is something that we see a lot of in the East, whether we're talking about music from India, from Japan, from China, and even the Middle East. We see these moments, those grand moments in which tempo and consistent rhythm is being pushed aside for the sake of the expressiveness of the soloist, which is very, very cool. So we have this plucking, but the choice of notes is so dark. There is something about the choice of chord relations, the harmony of each moment that feels so dark, so gloomy, something that is almost menacing or just unbelievably tragic. But it's being balanced by a rising vocal that kind of adds brightness, attempting to have hope. I'm sure you'll be able to notice it. Just the darkness that descends with the vocal that tries to brighten it up. But hopelessness is the theme of the day, it seems, so it's not going to succeed, at least not quite yet. So dark. This is that slightly brighter Dorian sound we talked about in Noster's theme, for example. And again, it appears in many places when it comes to this score, the general soundtrack of Nightreign, but just a beautiful moment. Just one tone. Ah, that last moment kind of brightens up the darkness that came before it, which I find gorgeous. Now, here they did something very, very smart. Essentially, when the violin comes in, it begins with a long note, as if it's joining the bedrock, right? The little ocean over which the melody is happening. And we are used to look at the string instrument, the plucked string instrument. We are used to looking at that as our focal point. But since it is doing a repetition, our ear is slowly diverting its attention to the variation. And in this case, the variation emerges from that bedrock because the violin begins taking the melody forward. There's just something so elegant about the way that each of these lines are flowing into one another, slowly shaping our perception of what this musical piece is saying, how it's behaving, and how it's moving. Just imagine that the world is plundered into oneness, right? Everything dies from the rain. So there's this bedrock of ominous sound. And from it, things try to resist, things try to rise and to take shape. And every time they do, well, they don't exactly do it on their own. They can't make it happen. So they build up upon each other. They are trying to create together something that will help them get out of that, let's say, fundamental sound, that basic musical floor that is being established. It's beautiful. Now, this line is so tragic, but I feel like it's being accentuated even more by the choice of the violinist to play the pitch in an unclean way, in a way that is kind of off tune. And it's not just any passing note, it's a lingering note. If something like that would happen in a recording setting of a soundtrack, usually we would just do another take. So this isn't an error, this is intentional, dragging the pitch down, but in a different way than what we had in the Adele soundtrack. We now have something that kind of extinguishes the small attempt of hope that is trying to rise out of that darkness. It's so nice. Check it out again. Just. And again, we have a slowing down of the tempo, right? The melody is basically slowing down, ta-dee-da-dee-da-dee, as if it was singing a phrase in a religious setting, for example. And that phrase would basically have as long of an ending as you needed to have for the prayer to finally like settle in the hearts and minds of everybody in church. Here we have, it's like another variation on the theme. Ta-dee-da-da-da, ta-dee-da-da-da-da, right? It's all evolving from the same seed. Look how rich this soundtrack is, but by making the most out of each core idea. Truly waste not, want not. Unbelievable. This, because the now the bedrock is being destabilized, that lower bass sound is being dragged down. That's more similar to what we've seen with Adele. This is also sound design driven, so there's something more artificial about the way this is achieved. Still, something so ominous, so dark, the melody kind of freezes over a little bit. It takes its time to try and rise again. Now, something that I find really interesting here is these are portions from the waltzing part of Hailstore's theme. I think like a second phase or something like that. Da dee da 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 da. But it's like it's pulsing. It's not fully getting back to life yet. It is flashes of what makes Hailstore or the Night Lord as a general title, right? I think there's something, it connects in your brain. It does make that distinction, especially in this part. Ti-da-da is like ti-da-da. Very, very close. But because it's being so sparse, it's being spaced over a larger amount of time, our brain perceives it differently. Our personal perception of time has so much to do with how we perceive different musical elements, and if we slow something down, like really, really slowly, it might become unrecognizable to us, because we have kind of these cycles in which our brain just resets. Like if it happened half an hour later, I'm no longer considering it a pattern, which is partially an evolutionary thing. By kind of hinting at the same idea musically, but spreading it apart, we really get something that is both new in its emotional impact, but also highly connected to what came before it, which I really appreciate. And we have that nervous tremolo in the strings, and the bass that descends. That was so much higher than a koto would be able to play. So now we're back to like a more harp oriented, like just very high plucks in the harp to brighten everything up. But beyond that, I think there's something brilliant about this portion. Let's check it out again. So here we have da dee da da da. The cello is trying to establish Hellstor's motif, and in a very, let's say, faithful way to the way that the motif is usually being played. But here we have the violin trying to kind of find its way upwards too, and after a second or so, they begin playing in octaves. They're beginning to play the same notes but in different registers. So it seems like they're moving together, like in a more unified way. Together, they can rise out of that fundamental darkness, which is such a beautiful parallel to what Nightreign is all about. The cooperation is at the heart of the narrative. And I'm talking both about the game's narrative, like the story, and the meta narrative of this being a co op game. We should remember this is a first for FromSoft. It is so appropriate on so many levels. Let's hear it again. Now we have some tension, and the vocals come out. Female vocals. We're back to the plucking, and the high violin reaching a peak for this part. In that high note, it makes sure that when it's holding that note, it messes up the pitch just a little bit. Listen to it. It is so well done. It's intentional, but it is done in a way that doesn't make you say, I don't like the music anymore. It's expression. It is breaking from that obsession we sometimes have as musicians to stick to the 12 tones as tuned as they can be, in pitch is the right choice. Here, kind of breaking away from that format a little bit, it is a tool of expression that should be reserved for tragic moments or horrifying moments. So there's something so smart about that performance decision. And I can't tell if it was a composer side decision, an audio director decision, or just the player themselves. Sometimes they themselves would suggest these types of flavor decisions. And that's why it's so great to work with musicians. A part of the reason why I love bringing different instrument players into my projects is because they are not me. They will offer things that I may not think of. And they have an entire life of musicianship that they lived and that would give them a different angle to the music they're going to create. So my piece now has the experience of a lot more years of music than I could provide on my own, which I find to be beautiful. So try to notice how at the very last note, when the violin is about to give up, it's about to kind of let go of the note, it's a little bit off tune. It's a bit more human. It's a bit less mechanical. Yeah, you can feel like it's almost choking with tears at the end of its note. It's such a beautiful gesture, and it requires true musicianship. And just like that, we're through with the end. Wylder's version, part 1. Honestly, it feels like it passed by so quickly because the music is so beautiful, but it's never too quickly. It is on time because it's Laura Clock. So I'd like to begin with Wylder's name. From what I could find, Wylder is an old English word meaning wilder. It means something that is unruly, something that belongs to nature, like a wild beast, which could work for Wylder, as he runs around a bunch and flies all over the place, and everything about his story seems to be about this freedom, right? With their riding horses. We're going to check the chapters real soon, but this is type of what came to my mind when I was thinking about the meaning of Wylder's name. But the other day, I had a conversation with two friends of the channel, Banoon and Boris Dragansani, and they told me that Wylder's name, the way that it's written, is based on a Gaelic pronunciation of the word Wylder. Definitely check their channels, by the way. I've heard that they are goated with the sauce. And if you cringed at that, you are legally obligated to hit the bell. Also, it's an unk moment. Yeah, there are going to be more of these. Have you seen the channel so far? So what is the meaning behind choosing a Gaelic pronunciation of the word Wylder? Well, for multiple reasons, I think it's very appropriate. Wylder is a very versatile character, so the fact that he can wield multiple weapons and kind of have a very flexible build to him, that is one thing that would be kind of a good reason to call him that. The all-rounder, right? He can wield multiple armaments and stuff like that. But there are other reasons why I think this is appropriate, partially because he ends up offering himself to wield Hellstor's rune. He takes his place, and that is something that only he does. Also, as we read his chapters, I want you to think about the concept of wielding, of holding on to something. The earring, his connection with his sister, presumably. Try to think about how holding on to things is partially both a strength of Wylder, but also one of his character flaws. So, let's read together the different chapters in Wylder's Remembrance. I think that could be interesting to explore. I also think it will load the second part we're going to be listening to from Wylder's The End with a lot more emotional substance, so let's go. The Wylder departed from his faraway home, braving the sea of fog to reach Limveld. A nightfarer's forays withered the soul and cloud recollection, causing one night to bleed into the next. But of one thing he remained certain, that he must track down the Night Lord and bury it. There was no choice. He repeated the words to himself, all the while clenching a precious object in his hand, a solitary earring, its counterpart long lost. So there is already so much about Wylder's character that we can glean, and a lot of themes flying around that I think are very interesting. After Wylder is getting away from his faraway home, he's braving the sea of fog, which again is a general term that has been used in Nightreign, but I think is a good pointer for kind of an interesting parallel they're going for. Now, this chapter tells us something interesting about the mechanics of the Nightfarers. Mechanics, I mean the in-world lore, not necessarily the in-game player mechanics. It says that the forays of the Nightfarers wither the soul and cloud recollection. That's a very interesting concept I want to engage with a little bit, because I find this to be very interesting, partially because there is this thing in Nightreign, this disappearance of names from the vast majority of the game. And all we have are like monikers, we have titles, and some of you in the comments, and I completely understand where you come from, attributed this to this line. How the journey of the Nightfarer makes them forget. Something about Limveld making them forget where they came from. And it is definitely a phenomenon, but I think it happens on multiple layers. I have mentioned it before, but it does seem like there is this focus in this game of the persona, the Jungian psychological concept of what we present externally, the mask that we wear. This game seems to only keep these masks for everyone but the Night Lords. Even if it's like bosses or Nightfarers, everybody is only keeping their titles. Nobody gets to have a name. From the very first moment, we can see Wylder's name is The Wylder. It's a title, it's not his name. None of them have names anymore. The self is erased completely. The only thing that he supposedly remembers is that he must track down the Night Lord and bury it, and that there's no choice. Now, the reason for why he remembers that one thing is possibly in the next line, because he repeated the words to himself, all the while clenching a precious object in his hand. That kind of reminds me of the Odyssey, when they're talking about the sirens and how if you tied yourself to the pole of your ship, you would be able to do your best and resist the call of the sirens. This is something that puts Wylder's tendency to hold on to things in a very practical and emotional context. Somehow he knew before coming here that he's bound to forget. So he prepared. He brought a memento of some sort, and he brought a mantra. And these two things are the only things that were left when he made it to Limfeld. That's why I said that when they say braving the sea of fog, I think they were making this parallel with the story from the Odyssey, because there is something thematic, at the very least, about these connections and about the kind of call that he is supposed to refuse. Because the sirens are a very different thing from just making you forget. They call you so your ship crashes to the rocks, so all of your sailors are incapable of operating the ship and the ship crashes completely. This doesn't quite align with it, but I do think that parallel is intentional, and maybe we'll see why. Chapter 2. In a corner of the round table hold, light shines in through the ceiling to a dimly lit room. There stood the Wylder, holding the solitary earring up to the light, casting a pattern on the wall that he could not comprehend. The Wylder was sure that it was some word, or perhaps a phrase, but he could not recall it. Where had he misplaced the earring? If he only had its counterpart, surely the meaning could be divined. So once again, we're seeing the breaking down of meaning of language, and we see how this detachment from the language he supposedly knows or knew in his past, that detachment leads him to inquire and look farther. That singular earring that he has really is kind of a lifeline for him, that he pulls on and pulls on until he finds who he is and what he's supposed to do beyond that one message that he's constantly saying to himself. Because the earring has nothing to do with it. For all intents and purposes, Wylder can go throughout the entire game and defeat Hailstor and never find out anything about where he came from and what his story is. So I find it interesting how the different remembrances are taking you aside from your main quest. They are, in a way, something that we have more emotional connection to, but is by all means secondary to the reasons why the Nightfarers are there. So in that way it gives us kind of glimpses into who they are, what's important to them. Now he naturally assumes that he misplaced the other earring. He does not remember who it belonged to, but he thinks meaning could be divined if he finds the other one. Well, meaning might be found, but I'm not sure it will be divined. The thing that would grant his conflict with Hailstor actual meaning is behind finding that other earring, that is true. But it's not the meaning of the phrase that we're talking about. It's a very cool play on words. It's very, very nice when it comes to the phrasing. Chapter 3. He dreamt of his home. 2 horses galloping across Windmill Knoll. They were a healthy pair of twins, which was rare. To the Wylder, and to someone, the horses were special. Upon a hill they ran abreast. He looked at her, hair dancing in the wind, and saw the earring on her left ear. But he could not recall a face. "My Lord Wylder, how are you today?" The voice of the Iron Menial awakened him. "Time for another errand, no doubt." Now here we're getting some kind of hints about Wylder's past, about the origin or the current placement of the other earring. We learn that potentially Wylder came from a place called Windwale Knoll, and that there were 2 horses that were special to Wylder and another person. These horses, for all we know, were real horses that they cherished, but they later become a symbol of the connection between Wylder and that, let's say, anonymous person. I do want to focus on this last sentence because when we're talking about what loads Wylder's ending with such tragedy, I do think it's important to notice all these double meanings hiding in the text. Time for another errand, no doubt. This sounds like Wylder is being sent on errands on the regular from the Iron Menial. And errands are not exactly what I would call this particular job that they have to kind of defeat the Night Lord. Errands is kind of more casual, and I do find that very interesting. Also, notice how it's ending with no doubt, which is a personality element, right? It's like we're hearing Wylder's thoughts, But not only, if Wylder came to the Round Table hold with a singular mission, bury the Night Lord, ending this daydream that he had with no doubt is like, stay focused, return to your mission, return to your quest. You have a job to do. Set aside all distractions. No doubt. And I think it's very ironic because Wylder might be the Nightfarer that has the most doubt on how to handle this particular situation. So that's definitely fascinating. Chapter 4. Clutching the now solitary earring, the Wylder drifted off into sleep. The sun was setting on Windwale Knoll, and as if in deference of its name, a gale howled. The dreaded winter was approaching. By the time of the first frost, he knew that his sister would be far along her journey. The Wylder fell silent, and someone, flashing her signature smile, flickered her earring with her finger. Goodbye for now, dear brother. Once we're done, we'll meet again. He could not remember her name, but he always remembered these parting words. So now we have this pattern of the different memories the Nightfarers have from their past kind of flickering in their sleep, which I find very interesting because it was said in the first chapter that one night bleeds into another. So what's real and what isn't, what a dream is and what a regular occurrence is, these things kind of blend. It also seems like the night is always coming when you're talking about Limfeld, so it is always night. They sometimes sleep, but night is eternal, or let's call it constant. Now, we are told that the sun was setting on Windwale Knoll, so it's also night, or at least approaching night, where he is, which I think is both a setting thing and it's also symbolic of the night growing closer, the thing that is going to separate him from his sister. Then we're told that the wind was howling, and that was kind of telling for Wylder that winter is coming. Not only that, but Wylder remembers it as the dreaded winter. Now, we can say the winter would be very rough or it would be very aggressive, but I think it was dreaded for a different reason. And so we're told by the time of the first frost, he knew that his sister would be far along her journey, which means if winter, the dreaded winter, is coming, that has a direct link to his sister leaving. Now, we don't know what she's leaving for, but we do know that there are young maidens that were sacrificed by the people originally objecting to the Night Lord. So that is the closest thing I can think of for that. It's cool how they have those blank spots when it comes to her name. Names are being erased here. It's not only his memory, it is the erasure of the self. From characters that had a backstory, they had a personality, but they're put into those parts they cannot escape, which is why I think that they are called the condemned. That is the cruelty of their fate. Their inner self is being erased constantly. They have a function, and they will fulfill that function without fail for eternity. Now, we have a very lively depiction of Wylder's sister. She's kind of flicking her earring, telling him that, hey, like, we're connected, don't forget, like, we have that to connect us. And she says goodbye for now. Once we're done, we'll meet again. And I think it's important to ask, done with what? She also says, once we're done, which means both of them have something they need to be done with. So I'm not sure what is this in-between event, because it doesn't sound like the travel to Limfeld. At the very least, not directly, because why would his sister have a different path? Unless she is a maiden to be sacrificed and he's a Nightfarer that was basically, it was ordained that he would have to go back and fight the Night Lord. So I'm not sure. Farther along, chapter 5. The Wylder continued to fight, never mentioning his younger sister. So at this point, we can assume that he remembers. There was no way forward except to soldier through the war at hand. He returned to the Round Table hold that day to discover a note from the Iron Menial. I've constructed what might explain your singular obsession with that earring. Then it came to me. The two of you possess a striking likeness. So much so, I simply cannot deny it. There is something that you must know. Please, check the study. So that's pretty interesting. As far as I know, unlike Duchess, that does have a face beneath her mask thingy, very telling face, mind you, Wylder, I don't think it does. I think it doesn't have a head, because the only version of him is one with a helmet, which I find pretty interesting, kind of to draw attention to that, because we wouldn't be able to tell that if the Iron Menial didn't tell us. We wouldn't be able to, kind of discern that from the design. And also, the Iron Menial says so much that I simply cannot deny it. I think he was asked to deny it because Duchess is a lot less thrilled about this memory coming back than Wylder is. She seems to be under the impression that it would hinder the mission, it would hinder what they're there to do, which she's not wrong about. The less information he has, the better, as far as she's concerned. Chapter 6. The Wylder had the same dream again and time again. A long night persists, driving his clansfolk to madness. After a horrific battle, all that remains upon Windmill Knoll is a sea of gravestones. After the deaths of cousin Farad, little Shirin, and his own father, the clan's chieftain, the Wylder discovers that only he remains. And now, only he can avenge his clan. Only he can bring an end to the night. But even if he can, once we're done, it will be goodbye. Even if the night were extinguished, the twin horses will never gallop beside one another again. I think chapter 6 is a big turn when it comes to the revelation, what we are shown and what Wylder is shown. And I think it's also the first hint of the absolute tragedy that's about to befall everyone involved, I think, but mainly Wylder and Duchess. Once we're done, it will be goodbye is a complete opposite of what he heard from his sister when he left. Essentially, there's a promise. So in a way, that promise between them that he remembered. He didn't have to memorize, he just held on to it. That promise between them, he cannot let go of. They're not going to be able to keep it. Also, it looks like the night has completely ravaged his lands. In a way, he has some parallels with Hailstor. Now, there are differences, because here it seems like not the champion ruined his city, not the hero ruined his kingdom, but the knight did. And the fact that the knight killed everything kind of puts Wylder in a parallel situation to Hailstor, in which he's capable of taking on the hate and malice that the Night Lord requires to be a servant of the night. When looking at the big endings for Elden Ring, let's say the Lord of Frenzied Flame, right? Your character has to embody that philosophy before they can choose that ending. They have to go through some kind of philosophical shift before they can really embody the concept that the ending holds within it. And I think that's what Wylder is condemned to. Essentially, he wouldn't be able to take Hailstor's place if he was not forged in a similar scenario, allowing him to wield the hate that cursed the world, which obviously is tragic, and we can see why he would try to resist that fate. Yet another sole survivor who lost everything. And maybe if they knew ahead of time that it would happen, people who put them up to this job, well, if they knew of that ahead of time, that's why the sister was kind of taken away. She had her part to play, which I find also interesting because there are some conflicts within this thing. She had her part to play and he had his. And those personas do take priority over who they are. Other than that, we are being told that their father was the clan's chieftain. Now, the words chieftain and clan are pretty interesting onto their own because they are less aristocratic than the title Duchess would have you believe. And I do think that has something to do with what Duchess symbolizes on her own, remembers her own story. So now only he can avenge his clan, because he's the last to remain. Only he can bring an end to the night. Why only he? Maybe only he of the people of his clan, possibly. But there is something unique about him that no one else can do. And I do think that sets him apart from the other Nightfarers. To seal off this tragedy, we get with an objective statement and not a quote. Even if the night were extinguished, the twin horses will never gallop beside one another again. That is a heavy realization, and I'm sure it's even heavier for Wylder to handle. And so we're getting a little bit of the reasoning of what makes Wylder do what he does, because he is feeling like the lone survivor, the last one, the only one who can do it. But now he sees his sister, and that no doubt from before, well, it's gonna become doubt real quick. Chapter 7. Holding his greatsword, the Wylder drifted off to sleep. Out of nowhere, he heard the rustle of cloth, then the clink of something being placed on the table. The Wylder awoke and slowly sat up. Now, Chapter 7 does not seem to be very informative on its own, but it does have a few interesting accent points. He was holding his greatsword when he drifted off to sleep. Sleeping with your weapon at hand is something you do when you think you might be woken up for immediate combat. It's something you do after you went through immense trauma, or you are constantly in a state of fighting. And him doing that in the roundtable hold, that definitely tells us about his mental state. We can also see that behavior in Guts, for example, from Berserk. The fact that he sleeps sometimes sitting or, always like beside and holding his sword, because when you've been through terrible things, you become a lot more agitated and a lot less trusting. And yeah, we can definitely see how his state of mind is darkening because of it. Chapter 8. The silver tear he grasped gently throbbed. The Wylder discovered a familiar brooch by his belongings. In his tribe, when one warrior gave such a gift to another, it was a promise to ever fight side by side, whether separated by land or sea. Did his young sister remember such customs? He pinned the brooch to his coat, as was their practice, and gently placed his hand upon it. Once we're done, it will be goodbye. He knew the twin horses would never run free again, as they once did, side by side. But perhaps just one could gallop onward. So the main focus of this chapter is essentially two main elements. It's the silver tear and the brooch. The brooch represents who he was before his clan's customs, kind of accepting that they will be fighting together even if they're separated. On the other hand, we have the silver tear, which represents metamorphosis. That is not something that came from his clan. That is something that, as far as we know, is kind of localized to the Nox. And so he needs to choose between who he used to be and who he could become. But there's another consideration here that we didn't have before. The twin horses would never run free again as they once did. Basically, Wylder is saying, okay, we can never return to what was. We cannot hold on to what was our life before. He would have to let go of this thing he's wielding with such a fervor. He would have to let that go and see where metamorphosis can take them, where the future and change could lead them. Because that way, at least, he might be imprisoned, but Duchess might walk free. Now, it's not the only interpretation, and there are multiple layers here, such as when the roundtable hold goes away, so is Duchess. She's also gone. She would stop existing. She would not get back to where she was. So don't take that as like the definitive take on what the story means. But I do think his choice is definitely shown as a dilemma. Are you going to keep wielding that thing that you grounded your personality to? The self that was lost, you defined it with something. Will you be able to let it go for a chance of the cycle to break? And I think it's interesting because the game doesn't necessarily give you a very clear answer about whether he was right about that. The breaking of cycles in Sekiro, in Elden Ring, in Dark Souls, there is a pretty definite statement of how cycles are being kind of prolonged, and when letting go is something you should learn how to do. That stagnation will always aggregate more corruption, more suffering. A very Shinto idea, right? The idea of flowing water not attracting insects, basically avoiding the concept of kegare, of corruption, or let's say impurity more than corruption, that can be derived from many situations in which something is either stagnant or is in the wrong place where it shouldn't be. So for example, since blood is something that should be within your body, then blood that is outside of your body is bound to aggregate corruption, right? It's not flowing, it does not belong where it is. That is putting it very generally, but you can research that if you're interested. My point being, this game is kind of a curveball, because I think we may have not seen the end quite yet. Let's read Chapter 9 and I'll tell you what I mean. Chapter 9. After a time, a new Night Lord came to be. The Round Table Hold, spared from annihilation, would be formed anew, in preparation for a new night. But would it be enough to free the priestess? He would never know. The Night Lord lumbered on, indifferent to whether or not the twin horses would ever ride again. So I would claim it's all but confirmed that Wylder became the new Night Lord. After a time, a new Night Lord came to be. I think the way it's phrased, though, after a time, a new Night Lord came to be. Came to be is a very passive action. From what we see, Wylder was wielding and using the silver tier, but this seems to be more ambiguous. Now, the reason Wylder did that is because if he would kill Hailstor without taking his place, the Round Table Hold would be destroyed. The hard pill to swallow for Wylder, I think, was that Duchess was tied to the Round Table Hold, which means there was never a chance of her being freed once it's destroyed. She would be destroyed with him. And so he makes the decision to try and prolong the process. He is stalling. He decides to put himself in prison and walk in the armor of the Night Lord for the chance that something else down the line, that farther generations may have a better solution, a way to free his sister without killing her. I think one of the saddest lines in this particular chapter is the last one. The Night Lord lumbered on, indifferent to whether or not the twin horses would ever ride again. Here we have a complete deletion of the self. All we're left with is the persona of the Night Lord. Everything that was a part of Wylder is gone now. He does not have anything, essentially, from who he was. He moved forward into becoming the next thing. But this is why I think this isn't the end of Nightreign, because technically, he prolonged another cycle. He just decided to do yet another thing that locks them in a cycle of constantly killing the new Night Lord and taking the place of the new Night Lord and killing the new Night Lord. This doesn't solve the issue. And so I think what we're going to see, maybe with the DLC, maybe in a future DLC, we need to get an ending for Duchess. Duchess is too important not to get an ending. Duchess is a main character. I don't think it's reasonable. So she might be the thing through which, like, her ending is the one in which we're going to see the cycle broken. Now, it's interesting that they were condemned into this cycle, right? They were kind of buried as, you know, the chosen ones to be fighting the night in the future. Remember how I told you the first thing we hear here is the sliding of stone against stone? That can definitely be alluding to one of the stone coffins that are beneath Round Table Hold. Because if we look at the condemned as representatives of the Tree Gifted tribe, that sound of sliding stone can be evocative of that cycle in which they're being buried and being like reanimated to take their place, the personas that they take, and fight the Night Lord. I think it might kind of be a time loop. From Software love explaining the mechanical elements of their games with lore backup. Like the hollows in Dark Souls 1, right? If you lose all of your humanity, you will begin to hollow. And how humanity is kind of tied to the Dark Soul and it's trying to re-aggregate itself. And in Elden Ring, we kind of leave behind our runes, which is our thoughts, our ambitions, as Melina calls them. The things that we will fight for. So what I think is happening here is the condemned are condemned for a time loop in which they forever have to fight the Night Lord, as if they are paying for some sin, some transgression that they brought upon the Earth Tree. So yeah, I'm definitely hoping that either this DLC or the next one is going to give us a bit of closure when it comes to Duchess, something that explains why she's the absolute spitting image of America. And just to make sure we notice that, she's often standing right near the portrait of America and Radagon. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to see what we have waiting for us in that department. But until the DLC comes out, we still have another part to go, so without further ado, an uninterrupted listening to part 2 of The End, Wylder's version. Oh, it's a piano version of Hailstorm's theme. The third phase, I think? Oh, it's so pretty. Oh, they're mashing up different parts. Just soprano singing pianissimo. And the harp is back. Oh, the bass from below. Wow. Just the cello alone. Oh. It's gorgeous. Oh, that's heartbreaking. And the motif is building. Oh, I got chills. That is definitely a koto. I'm stunned by this. This is such a beautiful piece of music. And it's so reserved. It is. It's so. It's so emotional. And it has all these different colors that it's shifting between without necessarily introducing a lot of different instruments. Just a very strong core idea and the metamorphosis that ensues when you let it, which is beautiful. Let's break it down. I'm diving in. I'm not waiting for this. So we begin with the piano. With this dance of night, but being played extremely softly. In a very spaced arrangement. Just here I felt like they were kind of bringing together different parts and kind of shortening the process, because you have the first part to da da dee da dee da 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 dee da 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 dee 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 da, and then I think they're tacking on a small motif from Hailstorm's theme, the third phase, a different part though. Da dee da dee da 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 dee da 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 dee da. I think they're taking that and they're developing it a little bit, and then they're holding the bar. They have like this elongation of the phrase. Listen to it again. It's also very slow, with the basses holding long below. And then da, 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 dee. And the weight. And the sopranos start alone. So beautiful. And they're singing so softly. Just as soft as possible. And they split. The harp is back. Now it is a harp. It's not gonna stay a harp for long. Now, the lower line of the basses here, the fact that it's rising, it's a very steering feeling. It's something that really makes you feel like, oh, holy moly, something is happening. And it kind of makes your stomach kind of clench a little bit. And you can see that the cello and the bass, they're kind of rising. There's this melodic line that is rising. And on top, to not distract from that movement, we have repeating high note in the choir. Pa, pa, pa. So we can focus on the movement that happens below in the conversation, because one portion is staying stagnant for a second. So cool. Check it out. And then they're back to singing Hailstorm's melody. So those moments in which some elements are moving, some elements are staying put, this conversation is handled so gently. It is a stunning piece of music. Stunning piece of music. I absolutely love it. Also notice how before the choir takes that high note and stays on it, we have the harp and the piano kind of pulsing on that note. It's more of the toll of the bell, and it's always very dramatic when you get this pulsing moment of something static, but the fact that it stopped moving is grabbing your attention. How it's moving from the harp and the piano to the higher choir, the soprano singers. The sopranos are doing it now. Now the harp and the piano. Back to them. Oh. Now the strings are joining the choir. Now there's this line that's being emphasized here. Pa, 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 pa. This leap, if you remember the first video that we've done on Nightreign, in which we've discussed how something within the Nightreign melodic framework, at least in the main theme, which is Hailstorm's theme, is a mirror image of the original framework of the main theme for Elden Ring. We said how this interval that the melody leaps in, pum pum, right? What we had with the harp and what we consider to be Marika's theme, pum pum. Here we have pum 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 pum. So we return to that mirror image, and the harp is participating in it, and I'm sure it's for a reason. It has to be for a reason. Yeah, it's gorgeous. Just the cello alone. And then the strings kind of come back with their tremolo, they're back and forth with the bow. Before they come in, try to notice, I'll shut up this time when I play it, but try to notice how when the cello is left alone, whenever it's not speaking, in between the notes, you can hear the space that it's playing in. That's what I meant when I say the space is a compositional choice. It is not something that is forced onto us. We can decide the acoustic environment in which the music is played, supposedly. I want you to kind of sense how that opens up everything and kind of as if it's changing the lighting almost within the music. You see that? Just the movement from everybody playing to the cello being alone. So good. This is such a beautiful, almost hopeful take on the theme for Hillstore. Ta da da dee da. There's something that has hope in it. Like there is some optimism within it. It's brighter than ta da da dee da da. It's like it's all dark, it's doom and gloom, it's hopeless. No, here it's a question. Here it's ta da da dee da dee da da dee da. It's something that opens the door for a better tomorrow. It opens the door for a future that might come, which I think represents how Wylder is thinking of this. It's tragic because he would never get to remember his sister even. Like he would stop caring because he would become someone else. He'd be reborn as the Night Lord. But for him, this is an opportunity for her to find a way to escape that prison without dying. For him, he thinks what I'm doing right now is buying time, but there's hope that she would live. Just small melodic changes do so much. Really. Beautiful orchestral texture because the violin we're hearing here is a solo violin and we have one violin playing but also an entire choir behind it kind of harmonizing that line. The violin is playing a bit more confidently. The choir is so reserved. It's really just mourning. It says mourning, but the melody is hopeful. It's self-sacrifice that Wylder is at peace with, at least while he can still remember who he is. And I think we're about to hit the moment in which the transformation is like completely taking place, at least conceptually. And there is like a small high bell sound that we can hear, which is a glockenspiel probably. It's like a percussion instrument that rings very high. And it gives this air of positivity, of light, the hope he has for his sister, more than the tragedy that befalls him, at the very least, at this moment. That's the transformation. So we had the entry of the brass, but still, this isn't bombastic. This isn't a boss fight. We have seen what massive scale looks like in the soundtrack. That's not what this is. This is the meaning that, when we read in that chapter, that the meaning would be divined from the other earring. This is the meaning they're talking about. This is the driving force in Wylder's story. He found meaning in trying to give his sister another chance. And on the short term, yeah, it might lock them in a loop. It might even seem selfish. But potentially this story can provide us with a way out that him doing that bought us enough time to achieve. It's such a beautiful, emotional moment when everything opens up and the brass come in, and just so very gently a symbol is kind of swelling up. They could have brought like heavy cannons for this. They did not. They were really, I'm saying that word a lot, reserved, but when you have an orchestra at your disposal, yeah, a lot of the times you will be measured by can you say more with less? And I feel like they absolutely knocked it out of the park. Now we have this line in the strings, the hailstorm motif is kind of being, they're kind of sequencing it, having it happen again and again. Ta dee da 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 dee da 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 da. Like they take this motif that used to be at the front and now it is an accompaniment element because he's slowly like turning into Hailstor. Or at the very least, he becomes the new Night Lord, right? Because Hailstor is the name of the first Night Lord. As far as we know, that's not necessarily Wylder. But now Wylder is definitely becoming the new Night Lord. Also, there is this repeating of ta-dee, ta-dee. These two notes are so prevalent in here, like they were in the main theme, by the way. And I feel like that, again, is another wink towards the original Elden Ring theme. So, yeah, just such a good piece of music, man. God damn. Now it's running faster. This. If we compare this to the beginning of the main theme for Nightreign, I promise you, I'll put it on the screen. I don't mind. I'll do it like an A-B thing. Listen how different it sounds. How it sounds more like a Japanese, uniquely Japanese instrument than it does with the harp at the beginning of the theme. I'm sure we're going to notice the difference. Like, I'll put it on the screen. And so, after all of that transformation, all we're left with is this simulacrum of the Night Lord. Something that imitates the Night Lord, taking its place and is close enough to fulfill that role. But that role is being played by a different actor, which again just ties so well to the idea we discussed of the persona. Just, it doesn't matter which self fulfills that part. So that persona is the melodic line, that is the theme of the Night Lord. But what plays it? Well, that depends on the self that needed to be sacrificed to take that place. The thing that we use to generate that melodic scenario. Such a good ending. I love it. And listen at the end of like the larger than life part, notice how dominant the space is. The echoing of what came before. That's an unreasonably big space. Infinite. This is 100% not the end of the game, and I'll tell you why. No, now I have no doubt. The ending, the melody, the harmony at the end there, it's unresolved. Da-dee-da. Now, to finish that, this is like the second degree of the scale. Da-dee-da-dee-da-dee-da-da-da. They're finishing on the second degree, so it doesn't get back home quite yet. It just lingers there. And that, what we call a 9 chord, it's a harmony that contains that second scale degree. And listen how unresolved it sounds. It sounds unfinished, even though the melody like begins, like it continues moving, but its last note is unfinished. We're definitely getting a more conclusive ending in one of the DLCs. I feel like at the very least it would be very odd to finish with something this unresolved, even though that's the nature of an online co-op game, right? That is somewhat live to a degree, right? Because it keeps moving, but I don't know. Something about this makes me feel like we're gonna get more. Now the strings are accompanying the koto, right? Ta. Ooh. That's the last note that we get a glimpse of. Ooh. The last note that's happening. Instead of ooh, just it being resolved downwards. Not resolved yet. I can 100% see why you guys recommended this one. It is a beautiful, beautiful track. And I think that it just goes to show how far you can take a simple motif like da dee da da da. Just taking that small portion of music and just explode it into an entire soundtrack full of meaning and ups and downs and different colorations and orchestrations. It's inspiring. It's inspiring. It is a school. It's a masterclass. The soundtrack is a masterclass in video game composition, in narrative-driven composition. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to see what we get with the DLC. And soon I'll upload another update video just so you know where the channel goes from here and what we're gonna do next. So until we do that, thank you so much for watching. I always appreciate your comments below and your support. It is it is humbling. Thank you so much. And until I release that update video, please do not forget to hydrate, to stretch, to take good care of yourselves. And I'll see you on the next one.